It's so good to see everybody. How's everybody feeling? I'm not feeling so good. I treated myself very cheaply last night, and today I'm paying for it. And somehow I hurt my leg sleeping. I guess that's just something that happens when you're older. I think what I would like to do, because this is sort of the afternoon, it's day 2, you're really hungover. Let's everybody stand up. And I know that some of you are going to be like, I don't want to stand up. Don't make me stand up. If you don't want to stand up, if you just stand up anyway, just for a second, just humor me. It's not optional. You have to do it. You made a bad choice by coming to this session. Now you're here. It's awkward. Let's just do a few calisthenics. Roll the shoulders like this. It feels really good. We're sort of releasing some nice, just roll the head like this. One exercise I like to do, if you just take your arms and sort of stick them out to the side, not too wide, be polite to the person next to you. You just bring them together one time like this, and then out, and then in, out, and then in. Go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. Go faster. Okay, sit down. Please, give me a break. I haven't even started yet. Okay. I would like to follow that energizing bit of calisthenics with a little exercise for you. Just close your eyes. The year is 2011. The #1 song in the US is Rolling in the Deep by Adele. I'm sorry, I don't know what it was in Bulgaria. So what was it? Somebody said it? No. Okay, we'll just assume it was Rolling in the Deep. So it's the #1 song in Bulgaria as well, worldwide. Barack Obama's president. Microsoft hires a guy named Eric Gamma from IBM. And they released this weird cryptic press release where they say that they've hired this guy. And they say that he's going to open up basically an office in Zurich, Switzerland. And then that's it. That's all they say. That's all the information that is given. And it's sort of like a blip on the radar, and some people see it, but they don't really think anything of it. Fast forward several years into the future, and this team in Zurich has been working on browser-based editors for the last 5 to 7 years. And we begin to see these editors show up in places all over Microsoft's tooling. So it shows up in the Office 365 stuff, it shows up in the Azure stuff if you use the Azure, the bash shell that's in Azure, you've all been working on that. And it also is the backbone of Visual Studio Code. So what they were working on, there's something called Project Monaco, is what powers Visual Studio Code. If you didn't know, Visual Studio Code is basically a website that's running on your computer via Electron. So it is a web-based application. And that's all very interesting, but what's even more interesting is that Eric Gamma is known for something else. Does anybody know what that is prior to Visual Studio Code?
Radiation. Gang of 4.
I'm going to let that one go, Chris.
Gang of 4.
Sorry, say again? Gang of 4. There's something else, though. He created a tool that a lot of people used and then needed counseling for. Does anybody remember what it was? Eric Gamma was the guy behind Eclipse back in the day. So I tell you that story to say that Eric Gamma is responsible for Visual Studio Code, but also responsible for Eclipse. What a story of absolution and forgiveness. I love that story. Just goes to show it's never too late. The same person that brought us Eclipse has now brought us Visual Studio Code. So just by a show of hands, how many people in this room are already using Visual Studio Code? Oh man, most of the room. I love such a good site. We did this yesterday. Who was in my view session yesterday? Man, you came back? Wow, I don't know. That either says something about me or something about you. I don't know. We'll figure that out. And so let's see what else. We have Atom. Anybody using Atom? Well, a couple people. Anybody WebStorm? Anybody using Eclipse? I saw right here. I'm so sorry. Well, there's a support group. We'll go later on. Stand up. Hi, my name is BURKE. I use Eclipse. Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some of the things that I've been collecting tips and tricks wise for Visual Studio Code. I love Visual Studio Code. And I've been working, I work at Microsoft. I do not work on the Visual Studio Code team, but I'm fortunate enough to be able to have access to those people via email and via Messenger, and so they can't get away from me. And so I just message them and ask them questions, and then they're forced to respond, or else they look rude over email, which they don't want to be. So I've been doing this and compiling a list of my favorite tips, tricks, extensions that I would like you to know about, that I think you would really enjoy as well, because you might not be aware that Visual Studio Code can do so much. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a resource, a URL, that's going to cover every tip, trick, and extension that we do here today, and that's all you need to know. So don't worry about having to remember everything that we go over, because you can't. All you need to remember is that URL. You do have to stay to the very end for the URL, or you can leave and then just come back like 10 minutes before the session's over. That would work too. All right, so first I want to start and I want to talk about my theme, because invariably the first question that I get asked is, what theme are you using for your application? I use a theme called Hoplite. Let me pull up a file that's a little bit more. I'll tell you what, let's do this. Watch this. I'm going to pull up a React file so you know that I'm smart, because I do React. So this is my theme. I really like light themes. I've been told that light themes are bad for your eyes because it's basically like staring at a lamp, but I'm not going to let science stand in the way of perfection. As you can see, this is a perfect theme. Also, I know that many of you like dark themes. You see yourself as Mr. Robot, sort of sitting, hacking in a corner. You're very secretive and you're very dangerous, and that's okay. But I like light themes. I also like the band Owl City, so you can judge me appropriately. I also use an icon theme called Material Icons. It's a very popular thing for Visual Studio Code. One of the great things about Material Icons is that there's an icon for every file type, even ones that you're not really that aware of. So for instance, in this project here, let's see, we've got some cool icons, but in this project here, one of my favorite things, if you go into views here, because they renamed Jade to Pug, you now get a pug in your project, which is just cool. I'm sorry, that's cool. I don't really like Pug or Jade, but I want to use it so I can have more Pug files in my project. So that's Material Icons and the Hoplite theme. I did write an article about this on how to have the best Visual Studio Code setup in the world. Some people took issue with me and said it was not the best. Those people are categorically incorrect. I am right. If you want to have the best, then you need to have a setup that's just like mine. Okay, that's my setup. Let's move on. One of the other things that people generally miss with Visual Studio Code, that is the most important thing that you can do to level up your Visual Studio Code skills and impress your friends, is to go through the interactive playground. That's actually on the welcome page, but it's below the fold. It's down here, right here. If you click on this, you can come over here and you get a set, basically a markdown tutorial and then some examples. But what's really cool is you can just go here and you can mess with these tutorials here. So in this case, you've got Command Option down to create separate cursors. Cool, multiple cursors, right? And I can't type, as we know from yesterday. Okay, cool. So the interactive playground is definitely the place that you should start. It's going to teach you all of the basics, the keyboard shortcuts. We're not going to go over that stuff today. I consider that stuff sort of fundamentals baked into the editor. You should do this on your own time. If you don't have the welcome page open, you can also get back to this thing at any point by just searching for interactive playground like this. And it's right there, and you can open it up. So definitely check out the interactive playground. That is the place to start. Now, let's talk about some cool stuff. Let's talk about Emmet. Who in here has heard of Emmet? Okay, so not everyone. I ask this question all the time, and invariably, at least half the room has never heard of Emmet before, and that's okay, because we're all in different spots for learning. So Emmet is a way to compose markup very quickly. So let me show you. For instance, in this blank page here, we can actually create an entire HTML file by saying HTML5, and that gives us all the markup for a file. It also gives us tab stops for everything here. Now normally, and this is Emmet doing this, normally when we would create markup, something like a div, what we would do is we do div like this, and then we close it, and then the editor closes the corresponding tag, right? And hopefully let's bump up the font size. And this is okay, but when hitting that shift angle bracket, or shift caret thing is kind of clunky, and I mess that up all the time. So Emmet makes this a lot easier. With Emmet, you can just do like this. You just say div and then tab, which is kind of cool. But you can also do something like this. You can say div dot, say you wanted a navbar class, and then you get a navbar class. Or you could just say navbar like this, and it infers that you want a div at all. So you can create really complex pieces of markup this way. So for instance, I've got this commented out here. Let's do this. But you can do something like navbar, and then you can drop down a level and say I want a link here with a class of navbar brand, and then at the same level as that, I want a navbar nav, and then I want inside of that an anchor tag, and I want 3 of them, and boom, right? And then you can tab through these things and sort of create all your markup this way, which is pretty neat. It's a very fast way to create markup. Now, I'll be honest with you and say that I know Emmet fairly well. I don't use it to create a lot of markup. I generally use it just to create single elements most of the time. But you can do this. Another thing that's very interesting that you can do with Emmet is you can, check this out. You could say, so in this case, let's say we had 3 anchors. Say we said home, and then we had about, and then say we had contact, okay? Another way to do this would be to start off, and I'm going to turn off my keyboard shortcuts here for a minute. Let's come up here. We could just say we had home, about, and contact, right? And we want to wrap this in some markup. So what we can do is select it all, and then we can say wrap individual lines with abbreviation right here, and then we can type in our abbreviation. So let's just say it's navbar. Inside of that, we have an anchor. It's a navbar brand, and then inside of that, we got a navbar nav. Inside of that, we have an anchor, and then we just stop with the star, and if we hit enter, it wraps all of our lines. We basically just created a menu, right? So there's multiple different ways using Emmet that you can create markup, and I generally take this command right here, this wrap abbreviations as lines, and I map it to a keyboard shortcut, which in my case is Alt-Shift-W, and so I can just highlight and then execute that command. If you do want to map keyboard shortcuts, it's, let's see, I believe it's KS, yes. Command K, let's do that again. Command K, Command S, and that gets you your keyboard shortcuts, and then you can just add a keyboard shortcut. Okay, cool, so that's Emmet. Another thing that we should talk about with Emmet, though, is that a lot of times we're not writing HTML, right? Unfortunately, we don't get to do that much anymore. Usually we're writing like JSX, or we're writing template strings in Angular. So it works there too, but with a little bit of configuration. So let's do this. Inside of this folder, I'm going to do a new file, and let's just call this album.js. And of course, you already know that I'm smart because I do React, so I'm going to do some React here. And there's a fantastic extension if you are doing React that you should totally install. It's called Simple React Snippets. Let me just show you that one. This is probably the best extension inside the extension gallery. I know this person right here who wrote this, so you're definitely going to want to download that. Okay, cool. So you got your simple React snippets. You're very smart because you are doing React. You're probably wearing a scarf and some tight pants as well. That's cool. You're very hip. And so what you want to do is import some React here. You would do a class, and then you call that album. And inside of that, you have an artist name. And then if you're like Brandon, your taste in music is terrible, so you're listening to Bon Iver or Bon Iver. Nobody knows. And then down here, this is where you're writing your JSX. So what you ideally want is for Emmet to continue to work in this file, which by default it does not, right? It's not working. You can make it work by adding some special characters here, but that's not really what you want. So you can override this by adding some settings to your user settings file. So we can go command comma, okay, that opens our user settings. Let's collapse the sidebar here. And what we want to do is just add, there we go. We're just going to add in some configuration here, and we're basically going to map JavaScript to a known language type of JavaScript React. Now, if you just Google Visual Studio language mappings, there's a whole list of these things. The same thing I did with Markdown. You can see Markdown over there. I mapped it to HTML because I also want Emmet to work in Markdown because HTML is valid in Markdown. It doesn't work out of the box, but you can add it by overriding it here. Now, once we've added that, we can come back here, and this now works, right? We can do this. It's div class name class. That's a terrible, terrible pattern. But what's interesting is that see how it expanded class to class name? Because it's smart enough to know that this is JSX, and class doesn't work in JSX. It has to be class name. Right? So Emmet is a very powerful tool. It's very smart. It's very extendable. I wrote a whole post on this on CSS Tricks if you want to check that out that dives really deep into the internals of Emmet and how that works inside of Visual Studio Code. Please do read that article because I'm going to need that for my metrics, for my review, and I want my bonus so I can buy some Legos for Christmas. All right, thank you. Let's go over here. Let's open back. Oh, and I should note, you'll see me clicking around on these things over here, but you don't actually have to do this. You can do Command X opens, or excuse me, Command Shift X opens the extensions. Let's see, Command Shift D opens Debug, Command-Shift-E opens Explorer, and then I think it's Control-Shift-G opens the Git integration here. So, instead of saying you can use keyboard shortcuts for pretty much anything inside of Visual Studio Code. All right, let's move right along. Let's talk about Prettier. Where is my Prettier support? Let me see if it seems to be turned off. Let me go back and find Prettier. Let's find Prettier. We'll talk about it. Yeah. I see it there, but usually it shows up in the bottom. Oh, yep, right here. There it is. Cool. Thank you. This one is better than I do. All right, so let's talk about Prettier for a minute, because Prettier is pretty cool. Anybody in here use Prettier? People use Prettier in here? Only a couple? Okay, so Prettier is a tool that basically formats your JavaScript code for you. We got into this discussion at dinner last night, and where's Brandon? I'm gonna do this right now. Tabs or spaces? Tabs. Spaces. Oh, right once. Okay, semicolons. No semicolons. 2, 3. All right. So Prettier basically takes this argument out of the equation, so you don't have to waste 2 hours of your evening like we did last night, debating about this and yelling at each other at a very nice restaurant. So what Prettier does is it just formats your code for you. I mean, literally, will wrap it in certain columns. It will change quotes for you. It's a really, really nice tool. And there's an extension called Prettier for Visual Studio Code that just uses Prettier to format your code. So if we take a look at something like this component here, we might have a component did mount, and then inside of that, maybe we want to do a fetch. We want to call some API. And then after that, we're going to get a result, and then the result is going to go in here, and we're going to take that result, we're going to turn it into JSON, and then that's going to return yet another promise, and we're going to take that JSON, and we're going to send it in, and then we're going to do something with the JSON here. I don't know, maybe we'll console log it out. And at this point, like you're like, this is a really long line of code. Maybe I'll just move this down here, I'll move it over, I'll leave the rest of it like that, and you don't like that, so you move it back, right? So you spend a lot of time formatting your code. So what Prettier does is it says, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore, just type and I'll format it for you. And the way that we do that is once Prettier is installed, just Command-Shift-P to open the command palette, and then format document. And boom, it automatically formats my promise chain for me. And this is configurable, right? If your team doesn't want to format like this, then you don't have to do this. Now, one of the things that you probably don't want to do is format your document with that menu command every time it needs to be formatted. You want this to just work, right? So we can do that. Let's go over to our user settings, and we can add in a editor.format on save. Set this to true. And now, if we come back here, right, instead of having to go and say format document, I can just save it, and boom, it formats my code for me. You can also do format on type, which will format as you type. Now, this is a little bit weird for me. I don't use this because it is literally formatting as you type. You can add a delay in. I hear like 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds is good. After you stop typing, Prettier will reformat the document. You can override anything in Prettier in your user settings here. You can see I've done a little bit of that. Like I've said single quotes are true, ESLint integration is true, and I've set the tab width to 2 spaces, Brandon, right? So Prettier is going to take care of all this stuff for me. The ESLint integration is neat because if you're using ESLint, Prettier will just default to your ESLint configuration file, and instead of warning you, it'll just make all those changes for you, which is really cool. Like how many times have you copy-pasted code in from Stack Overflow? Don't answer that question. And you have, it has double quotes, right? And all of a sudden you got double quotes and single quotes in your file, right? And so now you're going back through and you're changing your double quotes to single quotes or vice versa. But with Prettier, if I zoom in on this, check this out. Just click save, and boom, it formats all of my quotes to from double quotes to single quotes. Prettier was magical for me when I first learned about it. This is incredible. This saves me so much time, and it really, really does. It's remarkable how much stuff you don't have to worry about when Visual Studio Code is properly formatting your code for you. All right, so that's Prettier. That's just an extension you can grab from the extension gallery. Let's move right along. Let's talk about TypeScript. Where are my TypeScript people? Show of hands. That's pretty good, pretty good. So I'm not so much a TypeScript person myself. It's not that I don't like it, it's just that I find myself when doing React, I don't use it. And I'd like to talk to other people. If you do React, I'd like to know if you are using TypeScript with React. That said, I used to work on with the NativeScript team and with Kendo UI and with Angular. And while I'm a terrible Angular developer, I did really enjoy TypeScript. I liked it a lot because of the tooling that it gave me inside of the editor. And one of the very interesting things about VS Code is that you don't actually have to be using TypeScript to use TypeScript, which sounds crazy, but it's actually true. You can use TypeScript to check your JavaScript. All right, so all you have to do this is come up to the top of your file, and you're going to put in a whack here at ts check like this, and then save your file. And it's not type checking my file. Yes, the first demo fail of the day. All right, so normally what happens in this demo is I get some nice little squigglies lines under here because TypeScript is now checking this file and it knows that blog is not an actual command, it's console.log, although I wish console.log was a command because that would make my job a whole lot easier than it is today. It would also notice that I'm missing a variable here. Now, you may not want to do this on every single file. You wouldn't want to drop tscheck into the top of every file. So what you can do is you can come over here and you can say, let's see, I think it's JavaScript dot language. I'll tell you what, let's go look this one up real quick. Let's do that. Let's do it. Emmet, Prettier, we're going to do all this stuff. It's going to be so good. Let's see our type checking in JavaScript. JavaScript implicit project check. So implicit, where's my, bring back the Intellisense. Implicit, lost it. Implicit, there we go. Implicit project, nope, we don't want experimental decorators. We want implicit project config. Implicit project config .check.js. And this will enable TypeScript checking in all of our JavaScript files, which is rad. So this will work across your project now. You'll get TypeScript checking in all of your JavaScript files. So just goes to show you that you can actually use the TypeScript compiler to check actual JavaScript, even if it isn't TypeScript. So even though it's not working in this demo, I'm not sure what's going on. It will work for you, I promise. All right, so that was TypeScript checking. Let's talk about the integrated terminal. VS Code does have an integrated terminal, and one of the very interesting things about the integrated terminal in VS Code, which you can get to with control backtick, like that. So we've got a terminal here, and one of the really interesting things if you're a web developer about the terminal in VS Code is that this initially was an actual DOM representation. And so anytime you did anything inside of the editor, you're actually working with DOM nodes. And you don't know that, but that's what VS Code is doing under the covers. And that works. But if you are like me and you have people like me that are coming in doing crazy things in the terminal, which we'll talk about here in a minute, what they've done recently is they've changed this. So this is now a canvas, right? This is a canvas HTML element. Everything that you do here is rendered with a canvas. So it's actually really, really fast. So we can do a lot of dumb stuff with the terminal, which is cool. Like there's this cool program called Fortune, which renders a fortune. To be loved is very demoralizing. All right, I don't know what that means, but sure. Or we could pipe this to something like calce, like this. Bacteriological warfare, hard to believe we were once foolish enough to play around with that. All right, anyways, I don't know what these are, but you can do this. You can also do really pointless things like this, right? Because you have a terminal, so why not do this stuff? Or if you're like me, you just go to Starbucks and you wait until people are looking at you, and then you do this right here. You're like, I'm pretty cool. Right, so we have the integrated terminal here. That's a very nice thing. I personally have had a really hard time moving to the integrated terminal. I know it's there. I know I can use it, but there's something about my own terminal that really warms my soul. And part of the reason for that is that my terminal is the most beautiful, best configured terminal of all time. You might find that hard to believe, and I'm going to show you here in a minute. It is unreal. And so one of the things that I'm constantly doing is moving between my current project and my terminal, but in whatever directory I'm in. Visual Studio Code will actually do that for you. You can use Command-Shift-C, and it will open up. Where's my terminal? Where's my external? There it is. Lost my focus there. And it will open up an external terminal instance here. And then you can do more very interesting things like this. All right. So if you do, and you'll notice that we're in the right directory, right? So I'm in this project directory. So you can use the integrated terminal, or you can Command-Shift-C, you can open the external terminal and not lose your context, which I think is really, really cool. All right, let's do a quick time check. 2:56, we're good to go. All right, let's talk about running and debugging. You're probably aware that VS Code has a debugger, but what's really interesting is that you don't actually have to configure it to debug JavaScript. So for instance, in this case, we have a very simple function that we're calling that's looping over and logging out some messages, right? Very simple. We can actually run this without any sort of configuration whatsoever. So if we just come over here to our debug and hit the play, and it'll ask us, we'll just say node, and then launch this. And then let's come over here to our debug console, and you can see that it's already shelled it out right here. So we didn't actually have to do anything to get our node code debuggable. I use this all the time. I work on a lot of docs at Microsoft on the Azure side with the JavaScript stuff, and we do a lot of testing of APIs, and I use this all the time. You don't need to set up node debugging. You don't need to set up any sort of server to do this. You can just write JavaScript in VS Code and just debug it. There's no setup required from you, which is really, really cool. And of course, you could also stick breakpoints in there. So let's go back to our file here, launch it again. We need a valid breakpoint. I'll tell you what, oh, it already dropped it down there. Let's go ahead. And then it hits our breakpoint, and we can debug the way that we normally would. So that's really cool. That's zero config, run, and debug with Visual Studio Code, a feature that I really, really like. Let's do another one. Let's do Intellisense for JSON. This one's really cool. So everybody knows about Intellisense. I think, honestly, Visual Studio developers had this for a long time, even though Visual Studio didn't invent the concept. But people like standard JavaScript developers have not had this. We just had a text editor, and we just had to guess at whatever was coming next, or constantly refer to the docs. So Visual Studio Code does add Intellisense for those languages, which is nice. But it also adds it in some places that you normally wouldn't think that it would be there. Let me show you. One of those places, and you see me doing this, is in the user settings. So if we come over here to our user settings, and this one's wrong, let's try this one again. If we open quotes, it'll automatically start giving us what we can do here, right? And so we can use implicit project. It's not even there. What happened to my TypeScript checking? So we can use Intellisense to complete configurations in JSON files. So this works for user settings, which is not really that impressive because you kind of expect it to work here. But one place where it works that's really unexpected is in the package.json file. So let's open up a package.json. Let's do, I'll tell you what, let's open up this one here. Let's open the file. All right, so inside of a package.json file, oh, come on, stop complaining to me. Let's close. Close my user settings. Don't save. All right. All right, there we go. So inside of our settings file here, let's say we wanted to add in some new settings. So we could come down here and we could say, I don't know, maybe we're going to add in some dependencies. Let's see, I already have a dependencies node up here. Cool, so we could add in dependencies and node like that. But what's really interesting is that if we, let me move this back so we don't have invalid JSON. If we come up here, like let's say we wanted to add in an Npm package. Now I realize you don't normally do this, okay? Normally you Npm install and you get your package. But if you had to hand edit your JSON file, what's really weird to me is that if you can come down here and open up quotes, and it will actually, man, so many, oh, you know what it is? I'm missing a comma. There we go. So let's go down here. Let's open up some quotes. And it'll actually go out to NPM and start looking at packages that you can pull in. So it's reading NPM in real time. So obviously you would want to pull in something like CoffeeScript because you're like me and you can't let go of the past. So you do that, but now what's your problem? You don't know what version, right? You're constantly having to go back and look up the version, but guess what? Visual Studio Code knows that too. So it's actually pulling in packages from NPM and the latest version numbers as well, which I think is crazy, crazy cool. Again, a fringe thing, right? You wouldn't normally do this, but if you did it, it's there. And one of the things that I love about Visual Studio Code is it's constantly doing that. It's got all these features that you didn't know existed, and then you find it and you're like, oh, that's so cool. All right, so that's Intellisense inside of JSON files. I like that one a lot. Yeah, let's save this. All right, so let's do another one. Let's talk about, collapse this. Let's go back here. Ooh, let's talk about font ligatures. This one's a lot of fun. Show of hands, anybody know what font ligatures are? A couple of folks. Oh, the rest of you are really gonna like this one. Okay, this is really cool. I just discovered this recently. So there are something called font ligatures that you can use, and font ligatures are fonts that use special symbols to instead of multiple symbols. So for us, that may be something like equals equals. So it'll have one symbol that represents multiple symbols. We have a lot of these in programming. So Firacode is a font that you would download. If you just go Google Firacode, F-I-R-A code, there's a GitHub repo, there's a TTF file, you just download it, add it to your fonts, and then once you do that, come back to Visual Studio Code, you come over here to your user settings file, let's collapse this here, and let's take out this horrible, horrible configuration line that's never gonna work, and we'll do, let's do editor font family is Firacode. Now remember, you have to have the font installed. The first time I tried this, I put this setting in and I'm like, looks the same to me because I didn't have the font installed. So you have to have the font installed and then basically tell Visual Studio Code to use font ligatures. As soon as I save this, it's going to start using font ligatures. It actually is using font ligatures right now. Now it looks relatively exactly like it did. But if we come over here to one of our files, Firacode font ligatures, let's do, it's not going to be in there. Let's go in here, and we can take any, so look at this arrow here. So this is a fat arrow, so you have something like equals arrow. Let me zoom in on this so you can see this. Instead of equals arrow, you get an actual fat arrow symbol, which is really, really cool. Or if you did equals equals, you get an equal sign. What's really cool is if you do equals equals equals, you get a triple equal sign. And check this out. Not equals, you get the equals with the line through it. So this is probably the most important thing you're going to learn today, is how to get some really cool symbols inside of Visual Studio Code using Firacode. I learned this from the team. They all use font ligatures. I absolutely love font ligatures. But again, we've already established that I'm very easily amused and very simple. So these are the things that make me very happy. All right, so that's Firacode. Go ahead and check that out. I like that one a lot. All right, let's talk about debugging multiple processes. So we saw some simple debugging with Node. Impressive in the sense that you can do it without any configuration, but not super impressive in the larger scope of the world of debugging. So if we look at something like a more complex project, so let me jump over to my editor here, and let's do, I have a React project in here, my React app, there it is. Let's do that, and we'll open up Visual Studio Code, and we'll have a look at this project. This project has kind of a complex setup, but it's not too terribly uncommon these days. So this project is an entire web application. The front end is written in React, and the back end is using Express for the API. This is a very common pattern that we use as developers. We have a front end, and we have an API that runs on the server. The problem with modern JavaScript frameworks is that they use Webpack. And they use Webpack to bundle and hot reload JavaScript files so that we get that nice refresh, right? When you change a file, the page refreshes. The problem with that is that the server, the Express server, is running on one process, and Webpack has its own process. So in development, you actually have to run two separate things in order for this to work. But when you go to production, because you get static build assets, you're only running one process. Okay? So this makes it kind of difficult to debug. So normally the way that we handle this is we fire up the front end. So we'll come over here and say, npm run start browser, which is what I've called mine. This is going to fire up the front end, the React front end, and it's not going to do anything. It's not going to bring back a message because the message actually comes from the server, and it's actually telling me that that my JSON call is bad, right? So I'm making a call for JSON, not JSON. It's JSON, and this is what we get back here. So what we need to do is start the backend server. So let's do that. We'll come over here, and then we would start the backend server from here, and we would debug the React code in the browser, and we would debug the server code in the editor. Okay, this has sort of become standard for us. But you can actually debug both of these inside Visual Studio Code. And this is called a compound launch configuration. If we come over here to VS Code and look inside this launch.json file, let me go ahead and collapse all this. You can see what I've got here is several launch configurations. So the first one is I'm going to launch Chrome. I'm going to attach to port 3000. The second one is I'm going to launch Node, and I'm going to launch the server portion of this application. And then this one up here just says this is a compound launch configuration. When you run this one up here, instead run these two. So we come over here to debug, and we start this. And actually, my font's a little big, so I don't even know if I picked the right one. I think we did. There we go. So this is now working. It's open the browser. We can debug both. So if we come back over here and open up something like our app.js file where this fetch is actually happening. So this is the fetch that happens in the browser, okay? And then we open up our index file from the routes. This is the API that's actually returning the message. And then we refresh this page here. It breaks in the browser, right? So instead of debugging this in the browser, we're now debugging this inside of Visual Studio Code. This is our React code. And then if we continue through this over here, now we're debugging on the server. So instead of having to debug in two separate places, you can now do all of your debugging inside of Visual Studio Code. Now that's not to say that you shouldn't use your browser dev tools to debug. You should use whatever makes you happy. I personally find it more useful to debug my code in the same place where I write my code. But again, that's up to you. That's called a compound launch configuration, and you can have as many of these as you want. So you can launch, fire up, and attach debuggers to as many things as you would like to. That's up to you. Really cool feature. Not many people know about that one. Those are compound launch configurations. All right, let's go back here, switch over to a different version. All right, here we go. So that was multiple processes. Let's talk about the Insiders build. There's an Insiders build of Visual Studio Code that you can download. If you just search for Insiders build, Visual Studio Code Insiders build, what you'll get is essentially the latest build of Visual Studio Code. Not stable, but one that includes all the latest features. And they're always adding really cool features. In fact, there's some big announcements coming at Connect around Visual Studio Code. And so you want to watch that stuff. If you want to get that stuff ahead of time, you don't want to wait for that to hit stable, what you can do is you can download the Insiders build. Now that shows up right alongside your other builds. So if we look for Visual Studio Code, you can see the Insiders is green and the Visual Studio icon is blue. Thank goodness we're back to blue. So Visual Studio Code Insiders build, if you open this up here, this gives you all the latest and greatest. You can run this right alongside your standard installation. You won't have any problems. One of the things that's a little bit tricky for me is that if you'll notice, the theme in this is terrible, right? That's a terrible theme. We've already talked about what a horrible theme this is. Looks like Brandon's theme. Okay, so what I want to do is keep my stable installation of Visual Studio Code and my Insiders build in sync. Like I want the same theme, I want the same extensions, I want the same icons, I want everything to be the same. And I don't want to have to maintain that in two different places. And there's an extension that allows us to do this. And it's called Settings Sync. So come over here and search for Settings Sync extension. Let's grab it. We'll just install it here. Go ahead and reload. And now we're able to synchronize our settings. So how do we do that? Well, let's come back over to our stable version of VS Code. We want to sync these settings over to the Insiders build so that they stay the same. So we go to Sync. I already have it installed over here on this side. I'm going to update upload settings. And it's going to do that, hopefully. There we go. And it's going to come back. Let's see here. It should have given me a token gist ID. That's what I want right there. Don't copy my gist ID. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to say sync, download settings. It's going to ask us for the ID. And now it's going to start downloading. So the first thing it did was bump up my font size because my font size is bigger in my stable version. It's going to change the theme. It's going to install all of my extensions. And I can keep these two things in sync this way. What's really interesting is that you can also share your setup this way with someone else. So if you have a nice configuration and you want to give that to someone else, you can just give them the gist ID and the settings sync, and they can go ahead and pull it down. And you'll notice here that it's already going through and installing and sort of taking care of everything. This is going to take a while. You can sit here and wait on this. We'll let this go. The internet's not terribly fast today. All right, so that's the settings sync extension. Really, really cool, especially if you're using the Insiders build, which you definitely should. It's got a lot of cool stuff in there. All right, let's talk about Docker. I know that when I say that word, a lot of you just like rolled your eyes and tuned out. I'm not a huge fan either. Docker kind of makes me a little nervous because I just don't know what it is. I don't understand what it is. And I feel like everybody just says the word Docker, but they don't know what it is either, right? So there's a few people who know how to use Docker, and then there's the rest of us. We're like, I don't know what that thing is. It's containers. That doesn't mean anything. All right, so Docker is really powerful because it basically allows you to deploy your application to a server the same way that you would kind of deploy an exe. When you have an executable file, you take all your code, you stick it in the exe with all the dependencies, and then you roughly know that when you send it somewhere and somebody installs that, it's going to work on their machine because you've bundled up and shipped everything to them. It's the same concept, but for web applications. The problem with Docker is that there's a bit of a learning curve in so much as there are a lot of markup files and commands that you need to know. Visual Studio Code simplifies this greatly. So if we come over to our terminal here, let me go ahead and kill this. And let's do, I'm going to move up a directory. Let's do this Express app here. All right, and then we'll open up Visual Studio Code on this file. Go ahead and increase our font size. And I've got a lot of extensions. I'm going to hide some of these. So let's hide Cosmos DB for a minute. Let's hide commits. Let's hide Azure Functions. Good, good, good. Okay, so we have our Docker extension here, and we have an application. And what I want to do is, let me expand the code here so we can see it. I want to Dockerize this application or put it in a container and deploy it. Well, I don't know anything about Docker. Okay, so what I can do is, with the Docker extension, I can basically let Visual Studio Code handle all of this for me. This is an Express application. It's not terribly complex. It's sort of very normal. So what I'm going to do here is go Docker. You have to have the Docker extension installed. And I'm going to say add Docker files to Workspace. So it's going to start asking me some questions. It's like, well, what are you using? Are you using Go? And I'm like, no, I don't even know what the heck that is. I keep seeing Go everywhere on the internet. I'm like, what is Go? Anyway, I'm like the last person to know everything. Maybe you're using .NET Core. If you're cool like me, you're using Node.js. And of course, you want to be cool like me. And then it's going to ask you what port your app's listening on. And it knows because it's an Express app that my port's 3000. So even if I don't know that, Visual Studio Code knows that. And now it's going to create all the requisite Docker files to make this thing work in Docker. So what we've got here is a Docker ignore file. We've got a Docker compose debug, a Docker compose, and a Docker file. Now again, you don't need to know at this point what any of these things are. You do need to know that the way that Docker works is you have a project and you build that into an image and then you deploy the image. And the way that you do that is you basically just tell Docker to compose your image. So we're going to do that. So we'll just go Command P, Docker, and we're going to do compose up. Okay, so that's going to compose our image. And when we do that, it's going to give us two choices. Those two files, those YAML files in there, it wants to know, do you want to build for production or do you want to build for debugging? All right, so we're going to choose debug, so I'm going to show you something really cool here. So let's choose debug, and that's going to go ahead and compose our image here. You can see it running over here on the side. And when this is finished, after it runs the npm install, then we're going to be able to go out and actually work with this application because the image is going to be running and we can actually hit it from port 3000 because it's running. So let's go back over to our browser here and, oh, dude, it was already there. So let's do localhost, there we go. And what we should get now is an Express app, right? So it's a very simple Express app, but this is now running. Our container is running. We've Dockerized our application without knowing really anything about Docker, and here it is ready to go. Now, at this point, what a lot of people want to do is they want to debug their application. And you can debug Docker containers right from inside Visual Studio Code. And because we let Visual Studio Code configure Docker for us, we don't have to do anything else to get this to work. And that's why we picked the debug file when we did the compose command. So now that we've got this working, we can come over here, we can go to our debug, we can do our launch configurations here, and I've already got one for Docker. You can see attached to Node. And if you don't have this, actually, like if we were to come back up here, let's just take this file out altogether. Let's start from scratch. Let's go back here, and we'll just say here, and we're just going to choose Docker. And then Docker is going to automatically, Visual Studio Code is going to automatically give us the correct port. It knows the workspace root, right? We don't know any of these paths, but we don't need to. And then we can just attach. Our image is running, and now Visual Studio Code is attached to that Docker image. So we can now debug this Docker image. So if we come back over here, let's go to our index file and our routes. Let's put in a very simple breakpoint here. And if we refresh this page, boom, we're now debugging our Docker image. This is really, really cool stuff. You can do all this stuff with Docker on the command line. Visual Studio Code is basically just automating all these things for you, so you don't have to do that. Another thing that we can do with Docker, let's disconnect the debugger here, is we can control images that are running. So let's do Docker stop container. We'll, actually, let's leave it running for a second. We can do Docker, let's do escape out of this. Docker attach shell attached to my Express app. And then what this does is it attaches a shell, a bash shell, inside of our Docker container. And now we can do an ls, and we can see all of the files that are in our Docker container. So Visual Studio Code makes it really, really simple to work with Docker. And then when you're done and you're ready to actually deploy your Docker container, you can come over here to the Docker extension, this little thing right here, and you can see all of the images that you have locally here. These are all my images. And you can see all of the containers that I have, and then my registry. So that we provide for both Docker Hub and for Azure Container Registry. So let's say I wanted to push something to Docker Hub. What I would do is I'd come over and I would build my image. So let's come over here and do Docker stop. Let's stop this image, stop container. Then let's do Docker build image like this. It's going to ask us which Docker file we want to use. Again, Visual Studio Code created this for us. We don't have to know anything about that. We can tag it, right? So we'll just tag it as, I think I've already got one, so we'll just do latest-1. Go ahead and tag the image. Now it's going to go ahead and build the image. It's going to do the npm install. And now we're ready to actually push this thing. So we can come over here to our images right here, and we can say push, and then it'll go ahead and push this out to, actually, tell you what, let's do this, make sure we're authenticated. There we go. And we can browse this in Docker Hub. And we can see all of the images that are already out there. Let's see, let me try that. Let's try that push again. See if we can get that to work. Highlight this, push. Well, my authentication is a bit messed up, but we can push our Docker, and you can also do this from the command palette. So you can say Docker, let's see, Docker, where is it? Compose up, compose down, right here, push. Oh, there we go. I bet this works a little better. No, I'm still not authenticated. So if you were authenticated, you could push your Docker image up to either Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. So the tooling for Docker inside of Visual Studio Code is really, really fantastic. If you haven't checked out Docker, I'd highly recommend that you do that. It's one of those technologies where I still don't really understand how it works, and it doesn't seem logical to me that it even should work, but it's really, really amazing. It's really cool stuff. So that's Docker. Let's see, we've got, what do we have, 10 minutes left? Let's do a couple more because we can. Let's come over here. Let's go back to our Explorer. Oh, we're already there. Let's go over to a different instance. Let's do, let's talk about MongoDB. Anybody using MongoDB? Several folks? Okay. One of the things about MongoDB that's a bit frustrating is that you have to have some sort of administrative tool in order to be effective with it, right? So you need some sort of like Mongo admin or something so that you can actually work with your data. Otherwise, you're just flying blind. And you never know which one to download. There's several. Are they free? Are they not free? Visual Studio Code allows you to work with MongoDB instances right inside of your editor. So you actually don't have to leave Visual Studio Code to work with MongoDB. The way that you do that is you use something called the Azure Cosmos DB extension. Now, I know this might be a little bit weird that it's called Cosmos DB, but Azure has a database, NoSQL, called Cosmos DB, and it supports the MongoDB API. And that's what the extension was built for. So you can use that to work with Cosmos DB, and again, you should. That goes on my review. Also, I want Legos for Christmas, so please, everyone, check out Azure Cosmos DB. But what you can also do is you can attach to any running instance of Mongo that is exposed with a Mongo URL. So for instance, let's open up our terminal here, and let's just run Mongo, and that will go ahead and make sure that Mongo is running, and it gives us the URL right here. So this is my local instance of Mongo. I'm going to copy this, attach Mongo server. I'm going to paste this in, hit enter, and boom, it's attached to my local instance. Now, once I'm attached to the local instance, I can do all sorts of things. Like I can browse my collections. If I click on this, it'll actually bring back this document and this list of heroes here and show me all of the different documents that are inside of this collection. Not a very complicated collection. But we can also work with Mongo scrapbooks. So we can test our queries. So we say Mongo launch new Mongo scrapbook. Let's collapse this. And then we can do, actually, let's make sure that we're connected here. I always want to make sure I'm there. Connect, make sure we're connected. We are. We can see down here at the bottom. And let's just do db dot, and then we get Intellisense, right? There's our heroes collection. And then we can just start executing commands against this. So we could come up here and say Command-Shift-P, Mongo, execute commands, and this will go ahead and execute a find against our collection, bring back the results. We can also do, let's just close this. Yeah, don't save that. We can just do Command-Shift, let me turn my keyboard shortcuts back on. Command-Shift quote or Command-Shift backtick, and that will go ahead and execute the code or the query for us on this side. So we can work with our MongoDB instances inside of Visual Studio Code like this. And if you were using something like Cosmos DB, then you have a little bit more flexibility, because on that one you can actually go to your subscription, you can log into your subscription here, you can drill down, you can see all of your different Cosmos DB instances, and of course you can interact with the data and run queries against them like you normally would. So for working with MongoDB, the Cosmos DB extension is really, really nice because you can work with Mongo and you never have to leave Visual Studio Code. So that's one of my favorites. Lastly, I want to show you that you can actually deploy applications directly from Visual Studio Code. So let's go back to our Express app here. Where is it at? My Express app. I'm going to look at the Azure App Service extension. I'm just going to expand my subscription here, and then I'm going to create a new application. Just give it a new name. Sorry, I have to select my subscription. Let's give it a new name, test app. And then it's going to ask us for a resource. Oh, test app already exists. Obviously, I've practiced this once before. Let's do test app 1. Does that work? Yes? No? Test app 1 already exists. We have to pick a globally unique name. Please be available. Oh my God. All right, that one worked. All right, so at this point, it wants us to create a new resource group. Maybe we don't know what a resource group is. That's okay. We don't have to know. We'll just say create a new one. And then we're going to pick the data center that we want to stick this sucker in. We'll just say East US. You would probably pick a location that's a little closer to you, but you can use East US if you would like. And then we'll need a service plan. I've got some already in here. I'm just going to use this service plan here. And then it's going to ask us what version of Node we want to use, because it can see that it's a Node project. So we'll go ahead and use version 8.0. 6.11 is not LTS anymore, it's now 8.0. So we're going to use 8.0, and that's going to go ahead and create the site up in Azure. And then when this is done here, we can actually deploy this application directly from this extension. So yeah, we'll go ahead and let this run. It's going to take a few minutes. So those are most of the really nice things that I wanted to show you inside of Visual Studio Code. There's some really cool stuff in the latest release in regards to Git. I didn't talk about any of the Git integration. I don't use Git inside of Visual Studio Code. This is something I'm still learning. You will probably, or you may want to go back and get some of these tips at a later point in time, and I've created a site for you to do that. You can just do vscodecandothat.com, and every tip that we've done here today, including the demos that did not work in these nice videos that I've created for you here, including my theme, if you want to have the best theme in the world like me. And then you can just come through here and watch these videos. They're very short, they don't have any sounds, and they'll go through exactly all of the different things that we did today. So that's all I've got for you. Thank you so much for coming. The only thing you need to remember is vscodecandothat.com. Thank you for coming, I appreciate it.